Morning everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm continuing my grind through the Chinese tech tree and I've finally gotten to the first proper, or what I would consider proper anyway, Chinese tank. This being the Type 62. This is a rank 4 battle rating 6.7 Chinese light tank, 20.2 tons or 20 tons for the sake of argument, 442 horsepower engine, 70 kilometers an hour top speed, a crew of 4, negligible armor, 85mm Type 62 85TC gun, a 12.7 DSHK on the commander's cupola, and a 7.62 SG-MT machine gun in the turret. The turret rotation speed is only 7 degrees per second, which is glacially slow. The vertical guidance is -5 degrees of gun depression, which is on the better side of things for a Soviet sort of tank, but still nothing to really shout home about. The reload rate is quite slow really, 9.4 seconds, and that's with a little bit of improved loader skill as well. As you can see, I haven't actually used this crew all that much, so this is likely to improve in time. This is why this is a first impression, not a review. The hull armor is 25 25 16 and the turret is 50 35 32. I'm not going to bother viewing it in the armor viewer because quite frankly the armor is shockingly poor, as is to be expected for a light tank. So much so, I don't think we should even bother with the armor at all. I'll get onto that more so in the gameplay, but let's just quickly have a look at the modifications available for this tank. As you can see, I've been grinding my way through it slowly. I have the Heat FS round, which thankfully is only a tier 2 upgrade, although being a 6.7, unless you get into a full up tier at 7.7, the majority of the time you're going to be fighting World War II era tanks, which are a little bit more spread out, while you can penetrate them with no problems whatsoever, having, 300mm of penetration, you'll definitely penetrate. The problem is, because the crew tend to be more spaced out, you won't necessarily knock the tank out in one hit. And obviously you have spaced armor and stuff like that to compete with at 7.7, like on the Leopard A1A1. I haven't got the BR367 APC BC shell or the APCR shell yet. APCR I probably wouldn't bother with anyway because it's APCR and it tends to be a bit poor unless it's been, improved. But if it has, I haven't heard about it. Don't want to research that, thank you. So I'm going to talk in depth about the problems I'm having with this tank when we actually get into the gameplay footage, but suffice to say, the main problem I'm having so far is, there's no main problem really, it's all a bit of a problem. For one thing, the repair cost of this tank is nearly 8,000 lions. Why? Why is it? I'm losing money playing a 6.7. That should never happen, ever. And while I was, admittedly, playing this tank quite aggressively when I first got it, I've been trying to take more of the scout role as opposed to trying to use the Heat FS and the 85mm gun. I've been trying to scout tanks more than actually get into combat and fight tanks head on, because that's never a good idea in a light tank anyway. But the tank is quite sluggish, considering it says it can do 70 kilometers an hour. It can't. The most I've got out of it is 60. Yes, I still have the engine and the gearbox upgrade to go first, so as always this is subject to change, but at the moment the mobility of the tank is very difficult and it's making the stock grind quite hard, even with the FS shell. As soon as you fire, you give your position away and ping yourself to everybody else on the map. Believe me, people will know where you are if you fire your gun, whether there's a spotting mechanic in the game or not. So essentially the problem I'm having is you're not really fast enough to get to positions where you can scout effectively. The gun has too long of a reload for the tank, and it just struggles to actually, kill anything. And then there's another problem, which is actually its battle rating itself. What do you not see here? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. For those of you who said there isn't another 6.7 tank, you are entirely correct. The problem with this tank and why I'm running it on its own is because, as you can see, I haven't unlocked any of the other tanks in this tier yet, bar the Type 63, which I haven't actually driven yet because I was looking forward to driving Type 62, especially as it's been in the game for a while as a collectible, but I never got it, so I was quite eager to give it a go. There are no other 6.7 tanks in the game, meaning that you either have to up tier a 6.3, drastically up tier a 5.7, or up tier the Type 62 and risk getting it into 8.7 matches. I'm not saying this isn't a necessarily good or a bad thing, it really depends on the match and what you end up fighting against, and your playstyle of course, but I can't imagine Heat FS being too effective at 8.7. which then means you have to use one of the APC-BC shells. The stock shell has 133mm of penetration at 100 meters on a flat angle and 49 at a 60-degree angle. This can, in theory, work at top tier. I have deliberately up-tiered this thing with my Type 62 545 to see how it performed, and while the guns seem to be more effective with the APHE-BC shell than it was with the Heat FS, it unfortunately was not particularly... It was still slower than most other tanks at that tier, so it struggled. Anyway, we'll get into a little bit more detail about the problems I'm having with this tank in the gameplay, so let's jump on into a match. So here we are in one of the matches I have recorded. Before I start talking about the tank, allow me to quickly explain what these clips are actually going to be. I said in the hangar that we're going to jump into a match. That may be a little bit misleading. What I'm actually done, or what I have actually done, is recorded some footage from the games I've had in this tank so far. Clips that demonstrate how I've been trying to play the tank in a couple of different ways, sometimes being a little bit more aggressive, sometimes acting more as a scout like I'm trying to in this match, on a variety of different maps and a variety of different situations. And I'm using these as evidence and background footage while I continue to talk about the tank. That's essentially the idea here. So let's proceed. As I've already mentioned in the hangar, one of the problems with this tank is its battle rating. It sits at 6.7, and at the moment I'm currently shooting at a Panther. I'm not entirely sure which model of Panther this is, but it's not a Panther 2, so the highest it's going to be is about 6.0. From the side with the APHE BC shell, no problem whatsoever. I'm trying to use a mixture of scouting and actually engaging targets during this match, and for the most part it works reasonably well. You'll notice that while I'm actually doing this, one thing I'm not doing is using my mobility, or what the stat card would, claim to be mobility. I mentioned in the hangar that the top speed of this tank appears to be a lie, or at least at the moment, and as far as I can tell, that seems to be the case. Again, once I've received the engine and transmission upgrades, this may improve, so it's subject to change. As always with my preview videos or first impressions videos, I never try and give solid confirmation about whether a tank is good, bad, mediocre, or what have you. I try and just give you my experience and allow you to choose your opinion for yourself. Of course, I can give you an opinion of my own, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that can't change or that you have to have the same opinion as me. We're all capable of free will after all. So one of the problems with this tank, as well as its top speed not being as advertised, it's also quite, sluggish. It's got a 440 odd horsepower engine in a 20-ton tank, so you'd think that it'd be reasonably mobile. That works out as roughly, 40 horsepower per ton? Is that right, or is it 20 horsepower per ton? Either way, the power to weight ratio of this tank isn't actually that bad, although it seems to be quite sluggish to start moving, quite sluggish to get to speed, and more importantly, its actual hull rotation when still is horrifically poor. And the cornering on the tank is also quite heavy. The steering feels heavy. And I know that's going to sound quite weird to some of you, but compared to driving higher tier tanks with horsepower engines roughly the same, or lower tier tanks with engines less powerful even, such as the T-34s for example, they're not known to be particularly slow, but they make up for what little speed they have at low range with the traverse of the hull, which is what saves you in a lot of situations. And this plays in quite nicely with the complaint I have regarding the turret rotation speed. The early model T-54, for example, also has a very slow turret rotation, but you make up for this with the ability to rotate the hull quite quickly. You use the tank to engage at range as opposed to close range, as and where possible, obviously, and you don't attempt to... I don't know how to put it. You don't attempt to engage tanks at too close a range where they're more likely to, counter your slow turret rotation speed, or where it's more likely to be a problem. With this tank, though, that doesn't really work, because the hull doesn't rotate fast enough to compensate for the slow turret rotation. Or at least in my experience anyway. This is another game on the same map, although this time there is only one cap zone. What I've done this time is try to position myself in a place where I can cover the cap, I can scout enemy tanks on approach to the cap, and cover this back alley here, if you can really call it that, in an attempt to get a little extra XP and credits by knocking out an M41 Walker Bulldog from the front. The armour on this tank, as I said, is essentially useless. Any tier that you put it into, you're gonna get killed. You're gonna get one shot quite a lot. The crew is mostly all sat in a straight line. If you aim for the right of the hull and put a shell through the right of the hull, the chances are you will take out the driver, the gunner, and the loader in one shot. The commander will still be alive, of course, but your tank will be essentially knocked out because you'll only have one crew member remaining. So yeah, the survivability of a light tank is quite poor. What's new, Red? Well, nothing really. This has to be expected. However, I can't help but think that if the tank had less armour or a more higher horsepower engine, it would be more effective in the game. And the thing is that while I could make a comment like that, Gaijin try and pride themselves on, well, I suppose a lot less so these days, but they always did try and pride themselves on realism and all this, that and the other. So if the tank had a 442 horsepower engine, it had a 442 horsepower engine. If it weighed 20.2 tons and the armour was 50mm thick on the front of the turret, that's what it's going to be in the game. Sadly though, it just doesn't fit into the game particularly well. So let's continue to talk about the problem with the lineups. As I mentioned briefly in the hangar, the only options you really have for this tank are take it into a matches on its own, which is the option I went with, drastically up tier 5.7s, or drastically up tier the T62 by Type 62, by putting it into matches with 7.7 tanks. The latter of those three options is what I will be doing when I've unlocked the Type 59 and the Type 69, but until that happens, I'm having to try and grind it on my own. Or on its own, rather. I have tried taking it out a few times with my T62. Jesus, that's going to get confusing. The premium, and using the premium to grind lions, and lions mostly because you get a lot more lions from premium than you do from a tank with a talisman or just a normal tech tree tank. But even so, I'm still losing money with this thing. That nearly 8,000 lion repair cost I don't think is earned or deserved at all at the moment. Again, you know, this is subject to change in the future, but as far as I can tell, 8,000 lions repair cost for this thing just isn't necessary. It's too high. You rarely end up in a position where I'd say that it was warranted. So far in this match, as you can see, I've taken out the Bulldog, I've marked these, I don't know if they're T29s or T30s, I haven't really been paying attention, but I have spotted them. There's another Walker Bulldog around from the corner from me. What I should have done was stay put, or at the very least have been a little bit better with my aim. But, yeah, I tried rushing forward, I got myself killed. That was kind of my own fault, in fairness. There is something of a theme appearing here though, and that's that every time I seem to fire the gun and give my position away, I get killed. And it happens again in this match. I might actually just skip a little bit further forward in the clip in a minute just so you can watch that, but it seems as though every time you do anything other than just scouting in this tank, you get spotted and you get killed. Because you don't have the armour, you don't have the mobility, and you don't have the firepower to defend yourself in those situations. And it's kind of a shame, because giving this tank the 85mm gun with the heat round, sticking it at 6.7 and then making it only capable of scouting with a stupidly high repair cost just seems like a bit of a waste. So, yeah. I'll skip a little bit further forward in the clip for you, but in terms of what I have to say about this tank, that's honestly about it. At the moment, it's underwhelming. I wanted to really enjoy this tank, and who knows, when it's fully upgraded, maybe I will. But I think for now, I'm going to take it off of my lineup, and I'm going to continue grinding with the T62, because I was making RP and lions, which is quite important when you're trying to grind your way through a tech tree. So with that, I'll skip a little bit further forward and just leave the clip for you to watch, and I hope you guys enjoyed the rest of the video. I'll catch you in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. It really does help out the channel. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in a bit. Cheers.